The insult came so swiftly, no one in the classroom saw it coming, least of all Lindy Wei. One moment, she was quietly taking her seat, hoping to go unnoticed, and the next, Ms. Dlamini's voice sliced through the room like a blade. "Those shoes," the teacher scoffed, pointing at the torn leather barely holding together, "are a disgrace to this school." Laughter erupted. Lindy Wei froze. Her cheeks burned, her hands trembled, and her heart felt too heavy for her small chest. No one knew she had cried herself to sleep the night before. No one knew a man far away had just learned what happened to his daughter. And no one, absolutely no one, expected that tomorrow the sky above the school would thunder with the roar of a descending helicopter. Before we dive deeper, tell us, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? If you enjoy emotional African folktale-style stories, feel free to subscribe for more heartfelt dramas. Lindy Wei woke before sunrise, as she always did, long before the city stirred, and long before the elite students of Mbali Heights Private School rolled out of their soft beds. Dawn's first light crawled through the thin curtains of the small rented room she shared with her aunt, painting faint gold across the cracked walls. She lay still for a moment, listening to the faint hum of passing taxis and the distant chatter of street vendors setting up their stalls. This was the world she came from, simple, cramped, but filled with the quiet determination that lived in her bones. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. Her school uniform hung neatly on a wire hanger beside her bed, freshly washed and ironed by Aunt Busisway the night before. The blouse was slightly faded, but clean. The skirt, though old, had been hemmed and re-hemmed so many times it had become a tapestry of careful stitches. But it was the shoes, those worn, cracked leather shoes, that made her chest tighten. They sat by the door exactly where she had placed them yesterday after walking home with her head down, feeling the weight of the entire school's laughter echoing in her mind. She picked them up gently, almost apologetically, as though afraid to remind them of the cruel attention they had drawn. The tear near the toe had grown bigger. She ran her thumb over it, remembering the moment Ms. Dlamini's voice boomed across the classroom, the sound freezing her in place. She remembered the laughter, the pointing, the shame that clung to her like dust she couldn't shake off. She blinked fast, fighting the sting in her eyes. Not today. She refused to start another morning with tears. Aunt Busisway entered quietly, tying a headscarf over her hair, smelling faintly of the soap she used for work. "You're up early again," she said softly, though her eyes carried the worry of a woman who had seen too many hardships. "I have homework to finish," Lindy Wei lied, avoiding her gaze. Her aunt wasn't fooled. She crouched beside her, taking one of the torn shoes into her hands. She turned it over, examining the worn-out soles, the broken seam, the battered laces. Her breath caught the way it does when sadness meets helplessness. "I'm sorry, my child," she whispered. "I promise, as soon as I save a little more." "It's okay," Lindy Wei interrupted quickly. She didn't want the apology. She didn't want her aunt feeling guilty for something she had no power to fix. They still work. She gave a small smile, but it wobbled at the edges. Her aunt cupped her face gently. "You deserve better than this school makes you feel. You hear me?" Lindy Wei nodded, though deep inside she wasn't sure she believed it. After breakfast, a single slice of bread and weak tea, they walked together to the minibus taxi stop. As they waited, her aunt asked carefully, "Did something happen at school yesterday? You were quiet." Lindy Wei's breath caught. The memory flashed again. Ms. Dlamini's mocking smile, the erupting laughter, her own frozen shame. But she couldn't burden her aunt with that truth. "It was just a long day," she murmured. Her aunt looked unconvinced, but she didn't push further. When the taxi arrived, Lindy Wei squeezed inside, taking a seat by the window. As the city buildings grew taller and cleaner, the closer they got to the school district, her stomach twisted with the usual anxiety. She watched the sleek cars pulling into the gated driveways, the perfectly manicured gardens, the sparkling glass storefronts. These were the marks of wealth, visible, loud, impossible to ignore. They reminded her of everything she didn't have, Mbali Heights Private School towered ahead, its white pillars shining under the rising sun. The school gates opened automatically for a line of luxury SUVs. Students in polished shoes and tailored uniforms stepped out, each looking as though they had stepped straight from a magazine cover. When Lindiwe stepped off the taxi, she pulled her bag tighter against her shoulder, hoping the torn shoes would go unnoticed. But she already felt the burning weight of insecurity crawling up her spine. She kept her eyes low, walking quickly through the gate. Inside the courtyard, clusters of students chatted easily about weekend trips, new phones, and swimming lessons. Their laughter felt like another language, one she hadn't learned to understand. She spotted a familiar face among them, Naledi, the popular girl whose voice had been the loudest during yesterday's humiliation. She stood with her friends, flipping her expensive braids over her shoulder. As Lindiwe passed by, she heard a whisper not even subtle. "Look, the shoes survived the night." A few giggles followed. Lindiwe pretended she didn't hear. She kept walking, her heart beat fast, her mouth dry. But not everyone in the school was unkind. "Hey," a soft voice called behind her. She turned to see Tumi, a quiet boy who often sat alone during breaks. He looked at her with gentle concern. "Are you okay?" Lindiwe forced a smile. "I'm fine." He tilted his head slightly. "You don't have to pretend, you know." Her throat tightened. For a moment she considered telling him the truth that she felt small, humiliated, and terrified of facing another day. But words stuck in her chest like stones. "I'm fine," she repeated. Tumi didn't push. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." The bell rang, and they walked to class separately. Inside the classroom, sunlight spilled across the rows of desks. Lindiwe sat quietly in her usual corner. Trying to disappear into her seat, she kept her feet tucked beneath her chair, hoping Ms. Dlamini wouldn't look her way again. As Ms. Dlamini entered, the room fell silent. Her heels clicked sharply across the floor. Her lipstick was bright, her hair pulled into a tight bun, and her chin lifted with the confidence of someone who enjoyed authority a little too much. She glanced around the room, her gaze passing over the rich students with approving nods. Then her eyes landed on Lindiwe. A tiny smirk tugged at her lips, not cruel enough to be obvious, but sharp enough that Lindiwe felt it like a pinprick to the heart. The lesson began. Numbers filled the board, pens scratched across notebooks, but Lindiwe couldn't focus. She felt every breath, every sound, every shifting glance around her. Shame lingered in the air like a thick fog. When Ms. Dlamini passed by her desk, she paused, leaned down slightly, and whispered quiet enough for others not to hear, but clear enough to pierce straight through her. "Fix your appearance before you embarrass us again." Lindiwe's heart stuttered. She swallowed hard, blinking the tears back with all the strength she had left. The rest of the lesson passed in a blur. When the break bell rang, she remained frozen for a few seconds before gathering her things. As she stepped outside, she felt the cool air hit her face like a reminder to breathe. She didn't know that miles away, her father was hearing the first spark of truth, that his daughter had cried herself to sleep, that she had been mocked for her shoes, that someone had humiliated her for a poverty she didn't choose, and she certainly didn't know that tomorrow would shatter everything she thought she understood about her life. The morning sun climbed higher over Mbali Heights Private School, casting bright rays over the pristine buildings, and the courtyard filled with the chatter of wealthy students. Lindiwe moved quietly through the crowd, pulling her frayed bag closer to her shoulder and keeping her gaze downward. The humiliation from the previous day still clung to her like a stubborn shadow. Every whisper felt like it was about her. Every burst of laughter rang louder in her ears than it should have. And every footstep seemed to echo the words that had wounded her. "Those shoes are a disgrace to this school." Inside the staff room, Ms. Dlamini sat elegantly at one of the polished wooden tables, sipping her tea as though the world existed to serve her. Her posture was impeccable, her makeup flawless, her eyes sharp and assessing. She was the type of teacher who believed her reputation was built not on compassion or mentorship, but on control. Control over her class, control over how others perceived her, and control over maintaining the illusion that Mbali Heights was a school only for the elite. Around her, a few teachers chatted lightly about their weekends, new restaurants in the city, and the principal's announcement of upcoming school inspections. But it was not long before the conversation drifted toward the incident from yesterday. One teacher lowered her voice. "I heard there was some issue in your class with a scholarship girl." Ms. Dlamini tilted her head, pretending carelessness. "Issue?" she echoed. "Hardly. I simply expect students to meet the school's standards. Uniforms matter. Presentation matters. Discipline matters." The teacher across from her frowned slightly. "But she's a scholarship student, isn't she? They don't always have the means. That's not my concern." Ms. Dlamini cut sharply, setting her cup down with a soft clink. "If the school accepts them, they should at least try to look presentable. Presentable." The word slipped from her lips like a weapon polished and ready to strike. She continued with a cool smile. "We maintain a certain image here. Torn shoes and shabby appearances." She sighed dramatically. "It reflects poorly on the institution." Some teachers shifted uncomfortably. Others simply nodded, unwilling to challenge her authority. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, Lindy Wei walked toward her next class, trying to ignore the tiny group of girls who were snickering behind her. Naledi, with her sparkling bracelets and designer perfume, whispered loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. "I swear I could smell those shoes before she even walked past," she sneered. "It's embarrassing." Her friends burst into laughter. Toomey, standing near the drinking fountain, clenched his jaw. He wanted to say something, anything, but Naledi's status at the school made her untouchable. The popular students moved in tight circles, and anyone who dared challenge them risked becoming a target. Still, the cruelty gnawed at him. He caught up with Lindy Wei as she reached the classroom door. "Don't listen to them," he said quietly. She managed a small smile, though her eyes showed a deeper pain. "It's fine," she murmured, but it wasn't fine. Each comment chipped away at a part of her she needed to survive in this world. Inside the classroom, Ms. Dlamini stood at the front, arranging her notes. She glanced up as students entered. The wealthier ones greeted her warmly with exaggerated politeness. She returned their greetings with a pleased nod. But when her eyes landed on Lindy Wei, they hardened not with hatred, but with disdain, the kind rooted in years of unchecked arrogance. As the students settled, she began reviewing a lesson from the previous day. Her voice carried across the room, smooth, confident, cold. "Now, as I was saying yesterday, the responsibility of a serious student begins with discipline. Discipline in work, discipline in behavior, and discipline in presentation." A sloppy appearance, her gaze flicked toward the corner where Lindy Wei sat, suggests a sloppy mind. The class followed her gaze. A few snickers broke out. Lindy Wei shifted in her seat, pulling her feet under the desk even tighter. She felt like a spotlight was shining directly on her flaws. Miss Dlamini continued the lesson, her voice calm but dripping with subtle condescension. The wealthier students adored her strictness. It made them feel superior. To them, she was a gatekeeper, ensuring only the best remained at the top. But to the scholarship kids, she was a reminder that they were guests in a world not built for them. After the lecture, she asked students to come forward with their homework assignments. Naledi strutted to the front, handing hers over with a dramatic flourish. "I even rewrote it last night," she bragged. "You said presentation matters." Ms. Dlamini smiled approvingly. "Very good, Naledi. Excellent initiative." When Toomey approached, she nodded politely but with less enthusiasm. And when Lindy Wei's turn came, she didn't mask her irritation. Lindy Wei held out her neatly completed assignment pages filled with careful handwriting. But the teacher didn't glance at the work. Her eyes dropped to the shoes again. "Still torn," she whispered sharply. "Didn't I make myself clear yesterday?" Lindy Wei's throat tightened. I'm trying to fix them," she stammered. "That is not good enough," Ms. Dlamini snapped. "If you cannot follow simple uniform standards, do not expect to excel here." The class fell silent. Even the students who usually mocked Lindy Wei felt a slight discomfort. Her vulnerability was too naked, too human. Lindy Wei managed to return to her seat, barely holding back tears. Her hands trembled as she picked up her pencil, pretending to write to hide her shame. But Ms. Dlamini was far from finished exerting her control. As the students began a quiet exercise, she walked between the rows, her heels tapping authority with every step. When she reached Lindiwei's desk, she paused deliberately. "You must understand," she whispered coldly. "There is no place for carelessness here. If you want to stay, you must learn to look the part." Lindiwei stared at her paper. Unable to lift her head, she wanted to disappear, to fold into the smallness of her desk and become invisible. She didn't see the fleeting expression on Tumi's face, a mixture of anger and helplessness. He clenched his fists, wishing he had the courage to stand up to the teacher. When the lesson ended, students poured out of the classroom, buzzing with excitement about lunchtime. But Lindiwei lingered behind, pretending to pack slowly. The walls felt too close, the air too heavy. Once the room was empty, she glanced at the teacher still gathering her things at the front. She wanted to say something, to ask why she was being treated this way, but the words died in her throat. Instead, she slipped quietly out of the room. In the hallway, laughter broke out again, Naledi and her friends exaggerating their steps as if they were wearing broken shoes, dragging their feet in mocking imitation. "She walks like this," one girl giggled. "More shame," another chimed in. Lindiwei hurried past them, each step feeling heavier. Outside, she stood under the shade of a large jacaranda tree, her breath trembling. Purple petals fluttered around her. Delicate and soft, everything she felt she wasn't. Why is kindness so rare here, she wondered. Why is poverty treated like a crime? She didn't know that far away, the world she feared, stepping into the world of wealth, power, and authority belonged to her father. And he was beginning to sense he had made a terrible mistake by letting his daughter face these storms alone. But for now, she swallowed her hurt for the 1,000th time, steeling herself for the rest of the day. Tomorrow, the sky would split open. But today, she survived. The next morning arrived with a heaviness that clung to Lindiwei's spirit. Long before she stepped through the school gates, she had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same scene replaying in vivid detail. Her standing at the front of the classroom, her torn shoes exposed, the laughter of her classmates echoing around her like cruel music, and Miss Dlamini's cold, satisfied smirk carved into her memory. The humiliation hadn't faded. It had festered. Her aunt had noticed her swollen eyes during breakfast. "Are you sure you're all right, Lindiwei?" Aunt Basisway asked gently as she buttered the last slice of bread. Lindiwei nodded quickly, too afraid that speaking would shatter whatever strength she had left. She slipped her torn shoes on, wincing at the way the broken seam scraped against her toe. She wished she could fix them properly, but they were too worn out even for stitching. Still, she had no choice. These shoes had walked her through years of school, through dusty roads and rainy days, through moments when she thought she wouldn't make it. She had always believed they were enough, but now she wasn't sure. By the time she reached Mbali Heights, the school grounds were already buzzing with early morning energy. Students stood in small clusters, discussing homework, upcoming sports events, and weekend plans. A few of them turned to look at her as she passed. Their eyes lingered on her feet. She felt the sting of their judgment like thorns pricking her skin. Before she could reach her classroom, Naledi appeared flanked by her two loyal friends, Lerato and Zinhla. They walked with exaggerated confidence, stepping into Lindiwei's path as though the entire courtyard belonged to them. "Well, well," Naledi drawled, flicking her braids over her shoulder. "Look who's here! Did your shoes survive the night again?" Lindiwei swallowed hard and attempted to step around them, but Naledi moved to block her. "You know," Lerato chimed in with a mocking grin, "maybe we should start a charity for you. Save the Shoes Foundation." Zinhla pretended to gasp. "Or maybe we can ask Ms. Dlamini to hold another inspection. You know she loves high standards." Another burst of laughter erupted from the trio. Lindiwei didn't respond. Her silence had become a shield, thin and fragile, but still better than engaging. She walked away swiftly, her cheeks burning with humiliation, their laughter following her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Inside the classroom, she headed straight for her seat at the back corner. She pulled her feet beneath the desk, making sure not a single inch of her torn shoes could be seen. Her heartbeat was loud, too loud, as though it was trying to drown out the whispers around her. When Ms. Dlamini entered, it felt like the temperature in the room dropped. She strode to the front with the confidence of someone who believed every eye in the room existed to admire her. Her heels clicked sharply, each step a reminder of her authority. "Good morning, class," she said, her voice crisp and controlled. The students responded in unison, but her eyes immediately searched the room until they found Lindy Wei. There it was again, that glimmer of disdain. A cruel smirk flickered across her lips, barely noticeable to others but unmistakable to Lindy Wei. The lesson began, but tension crackled beneath the surface. At one point, Ms. Dlamini instructed the students to stand and recite a passage. As they rose to their feet, Lindy Wei hesitated. Standing meant exposing her shoes again. Her chest tightened, and she felt rooted to her seat. "Lindy Wei," Ms. Dlamini said sharply, "why are you still sitting?" Every head turned, every eye focused on her. Lindy Wei whispered. "I'm not feeling well, ma'am." "Nonsense," the teacher replied with an icy tone. "Stand up." Her heart pounded painfully. Slowly, she rose from her seat. Her shoes peeked out from beneath her skirt, the torn seam glaring under the classroom lights like a wound. A few snickers started quiet at first, then louder. Naledi covered her mouth in exaggerated shock. "Oh no, not again," she whispered loudly enough for the entire class to hear. "Ms. Dlamini stepped forward, her expression twisted with impatience. "Lindy Wei," she began, her tone dripping with judgment. "How many times must we address this? Uniforms at Mbali Heights should reflect discipline, pride, respectability. What message do you think you send when you walk into this institution looking like this?" Her hand gestured toward the shoes slowly, dramatically, like she was pointing at something foul. In that moment, Lindy Wei felt her soul shrink. Her feet trembled. She wished the ground would swallow her whole. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The teacher clicked her tongue. "Sorry is not enough. If you cannot meet basic standards, you must reconsider whether this school is appropriate for you." The words landed like blows. Lindy Wei stared at her shoes, unable to look up. Her throat burned as humiliation spread through her like fire. She had thought yesterday was the worst moment of her life, but this was worse, far worse, because now the entire class waited to see how deeply she would break. Toomey, seated near the front, clenched his fists under his desk. He felt anger bubbling inside him, anger at the cruelty, at the injustice, at how small Lindy Wei looked beneath Ms. Dlamini's scrutiny. But he couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't challenge a teacher who held power not just over grades, but over the entire school culture. "Sit down," Ms. Dlamini said finally, her voice clipped. Lindy Wei sank into her chair like a collapsing shadow. The lesson continued, but her mind spun in circles. Every minute felt like an hour. Every whisper felt like a dagger. She wondered how much more she could endure. She wondered if she belonged anywhere. During break time, she slipped outside alone, wandering to a quiet corner of the schoolyard where a jacaranda tree stood tall and silent. Purple petals drifted around her like soft confetti, a beauty that felt completely at odds with her reality. She hugged her knees and let out a shaky breath. Her eyes stung, but she forced herself not to cry. Not here, not again. But in another part of the city, far above office towers, surrounded by the powerful hum of wealth and influence, a man had just received a phone call that would change everything. His daughter's tears had finally reached him, and he was about to shake the earth beneath the school that dared to break her. The school cafeteria buzzed with noise, clattering trays, and laughter echoing from every corner. It was supposed to be a place where students relaxed, between classes, where friendships formed over shared meals. But for Lindiwei, it felt like a battlefield filled with enemies she never chose and wounds she never asked for. She carried her lunch, a simple plate of rice and beans, searching for a quiet corner far from curious eyes. As she walked through the crowded rows of tables, she heard them before she saw them. Naledi and her group, already whispering. Their voices rose in mocking crescendos, rehearsed taunts spilling from their lips like venom. "Maybe we should hold a shoe donation drive," Naledi said dramatically, tossing her braided hair over her shoulder. "Some people clearly need it." Laughter erupted around her. "Or wait, better idea," Zinla chimed in, poking Lerado's arm excitedly. "We could invite her to teach us how to walk with broken shoes. Maybe it's a talent." More laughter. Lindiwei kept walking, clutching her tray so tightly her fingers ached. She felt everyone's eyes on her again, or maybe it was just her mind replaying humiliation over and over. Either way, she didn't dare look up. She found a small table tucked near the windows, partially hidden by a large potted plant. It wasn't much privacy, but it was enough to breathe for a moment. She set her food down, but her appetite had long vanished. The words from earlier echoed, "If you cannot meet basic standards, reconsider whether this school is appropriate for you." The teacher's voice cut deeper than those of her classmates, because teachers were supposed to guide, protect, uplift. Instead, Ms. Dlamini had become the biggest voice telling her she didn't belong. She poked her fork at the food absent-mindedly, replaying the scene in her mind. The humiliation, the laughter, the spotlight on her torn shoes. "This school wasn't built for you," a voice whispered inside her, so familiar she almost believed it. "You'll never fit in here." She pressed her lips together, trying to silence the echo. A shadow fell across her table. She looked up, startled, only to see Tumi standing there with his own lunch tray in hand. "Is this seat taken?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. He sat down across from her, not saying anything at first. He let the silence settle, not heavy or awkward, but gentle. After a moment, he finally spoke. "You don't have to sit alone every day, you know." Lindiwei gave a small shrug. "It's okay, I don't mind." "I mind," he said. Surprising her, he pushed his glasses up his nose and added, "I don't like seeing you hurt." Her eyes widened slightly. She wasn't used to hearing kindness so directly. "You saw what happened today," she murmured, staring at her tray. "It was worse than yesterday." "I know," Tumi admitted. "I wanted to say something, but—" His voice faltered. "I was scared." She looked at him curiously. "Scared of what?" "You." He glanced around the cafeteria before answering. "Scared of becoming a target, too. People like Naledi, they don't stop when you challenge them. And Ms. Dlamini, she acts like she's the queen of this place. Going against her isn't easy." Lindiwei nodded slowly. She understood. The power dynamics at Mbali Heights were complicated, unspoken hierarchies built on wealth, privilege, and influence. Even teachers picked sides. "I'm sorry," Tumi whispered suddenly. "For what?" she asked, genuinely confused. "For not standing up for you." Her chest tightened, not with sadness this time, but with something warmer. Gratitude. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. "You're the only person here who's even been kind to me." Tumi looked down, embarrassed. "Kindness shouldn't be something rare." She smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but here, it feels like it is." Their conversation was interrupted by Naledi's sharp laughter ringing across the cafeteria once more. "Look at them," she exclaimed, pointing toward Lindiwei and Tumi, the scholarship duo, hiding in the corner like they're in some charity home. Her friends erupted in hysterics. Lindiwei bowed her head, shame flooding her again, but Tumi's jaw tightened. He wasn't brave enough to confront them directly yet, but the anger burning in his eyes was unmistakable. "Don't listen to them," he said firmly. "They're loud because they're insecure. People who feel small try to make others feel smaller." Lindiwei looked up at him. His words landed somewhere deep, somewhere she didn't know, needed healing. "Tumi," she said softly, "why are you being so kind to me?" He hesitated. "Because I know what it's like. To feel like you don't belong." She blinked, surprised. But you don't look." Poor, he asked with a sad smile. Maybe not, but I don't fit in with them either. Not really. I don't have fancy gadgets, or expensive shoes, or parents who spoil me. I'm just here, invisible. Lindy nodded slowly. She hadn't realized it before, but there was a loneliness in his eyes that mirrored her own. Maybe they weren't so different. Before she could reply, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Students began moving toward the exits in chaotic waves. Naledi's group strutted past their table, still smirking. Careful, Naledi sneered as she walked by. You don't want to catch whatever disease those shoes carry. Laughter followed again. Tumi stood suddenly, blocking Naledi's path. Leave her alone, he said, not loud but firm. Naledi raised an eyebrow. Surprised. Excuse me. You heard me, he replied, his voice trembling slightly but determined. Just stop. Her friends gasped, dramatically. Naledi's expression shifted, first amusement, then annoyance, then something sharper. Or what, Tumi? You think you can lecture me? You think you matter? He swallowed hard but held his ground. Naledi took a step closer, her voice dropping. You're just a scholarship kid pretending to be brave. Don't forget who runs this school. With that, she pushed past him, bumping his shoulder intentionally. Tumi exhaled shakily once she was gone. That was brave, Lindy murmured. He shook his head. It wasn't enough. It meant something to me, she whispered. For the first time that day, she felt a spark of hope flicker inside her chest, small but real. After lunch, the whispers continued, the laughter continued, the stares continued, but something in her had shifted. She wasn't completely alone. There was at least one person who saw beyond her torn shoes. Meanwhile, in the halls, Ms. Dlamini continued her day, as though nothing unusual had happened. She taught her classes with controlled authority, gliding through the school with her nose slightly raised. She even passed by Lindiwe once more in the afternoon, giving her a cold, evaluating glance. You have still not fixed your shoes, she said under her breath. Lindiwe froze, but this time, she lifted her chin just slightly. I'm doing the best I can, the teacher scoffed. Your best is clearly not enough. She walked away, leaving the sting of her words hanging in the air. But Lindiwe didn't crumble this time. She felt the hurt, yes, but she also felt the faint strength growing inside her. The beginning of something she didn't yet understand. She didn't know she would soon learn the truth about her father. She didn't know her cries had reached someone powerful. She didn't know her life was about to change dramatically. But the winds of tomorrow were already shifting, and in the distance, the steady beating of a helicopter blade was beginning to rise. The walk home after school felt longer than usual, as though each step dragged a weight behind it. The sidewalks were crowded with vendors packing up for the day, children playing with makeshift toys, and workers hurrying toward fading daylight. But Lindiwe didn't notice any of it. Her mind was replaying the day in brutal loops. Naledi's sneers, the cruel laughter, Ms. Dlamini's biting words delivered like polished daggers, and the humiliation that sat deep in her bones. By the time she reached the small rented room she shared with her aunt, the sun had already begun to set, washing the sky with shades of orange and purple. The door creaked as she entered, and Aunt Busiswe looked up immediately from the small stove where she simmered a pot of stew. You're late, my child, she said softly. I was getting worried. I stayed a bit after class, Lindiwe replied, her voice subdued. Her aunt studied her carefully, noticing the stiffness in her shoulders, the quiet drag in her movements. Did something happen again? She asked gently. Lindiwe forced a smile. No, just tired. But her aunt's eyes, wise, experienced, weary from years of hardship, saw straight through her. Sit, she murmured, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. Lindiwe sat on the edge of the small bed. Her aunt reached down and picked up one of the torn shoes, turning it over slowly in her hands. The broken seam looked even worse today, the crack wider than it had been yesterday. These shoes, Aunt Busiswe whispered, more to herself than to Lindiwe, have carried you through many years. But they shouldn't have to carry you alone. Something in the way she said the last word alone made tears prick the corners of Lindiway's eyes. I'm fine, Auntie, she tried again. Really, but her aunt pressed gently. You haven't been yourself these past 2 days. I know when something weighs heavy on your heart. Please talk to me. The kindness in her voice, so different from the harsh judgment Lindiway endured at school, cracked something inside her. For a moment, she fought it, tried to swallow the pain, tried to be strong, but the words slipped free before she could stop them. They laughed at me, she whispered, in front of everyone. Aunt Busiswe's face tightened with concern. Who laughed at you? The teacher and the students, Lindiway said, her voice trembling. They made fun of my shoes. They said I'm a disgrace. The hurt she had held inside all day spilled out in a soft, wounded confession. Her aunt set the shoe down gently, then pulled her into an embrace. The warmth of it, the safety, made the tears fall faster. Oh, my child, her aunt whispered. I am so sorry. Lindiway cried against her shoulder, the tears mixing with all the fear, shame, anger, and exhaustion she had bottled up. She cried for the unfairness of it, for the cruelty, for the loneliness. She cried for wanting to belong in a world that kept pushing her away. After a while, when her breathing steadied, her aunt guided her back to sit on the bed. Listen to me, she said firmly, lifting Lindiway's chin. You are not a disgrace. Do you hear me? Not ever. Your worth is not measured by shoes or money or what those people think. You are strong, smart, and kind, and you deserve better than how they treated you. Lindiway nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. Her aunt hesitated then, glancing at the old wooden drawer across the room. Something in her expression shifted, like she was weighing a truth she had kept hidden for far too long. There is something you need to know. She began slowly. Lindiway blinked, confused. Know about what? About your father. Her breath caught. She felt a sudden coldness in her chest. What about him? Her aunt sighed deeply before sitting beside her. You think he works in another city, yes? That he is just too busy to visit. That's what you said, Lindiway replied quietly. Her aunt closed her eyes for a moment. I told you what I thought was safest, but the truth is, your father did not leave because he didn't love you. He left to protect you from the world he lives in. The words stunned her. Protect me. Why? Her aunt stood, opened the wooden drawer, and pulled out a small envelope, old, slightly worn, with Lindiway's name written in careful handwriting. She handed it to her, but did not let go right away. Your father, she said softly, is not a simple man. He is wealthy, very wealthy. The room seemed to tilt. Lindiway stared at her aunt in disbelief. Wealthy? But then why? Why do we live like this? Why didn't he help? Why didn't he come for me? Why didn't he show himself? Because, her aunt answered gently, he wanted you to grow up humble, to learn resilience. He believed that if you grew up in luxury from the start, you might lose the strength your mother once had, the strength that made her remarkable, her mother. A pang went through her chest, but he also believed, her aunt continued, that true character, yours and others, shows itself when no one knows who you are, when no one treats you differently because of money. Lindiway's mind raced. The broken shoes, the humiliation, the laughter, the shame, all of it endured because a father she barely knew had chosen a life of simplicity for her. She wasn't sure how to feel. Angry, confused, betrayed, grateful. All of them wrestled inside her. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. Why are you telling me this now? Her aunt hesitated again. Because I think he needs to know what you're going through. I think he has forgotten that even the strongest child can break. Lindiway swallowed hard. You're going to call him? Yes, her aunt said. Tonight. Silence filled the small room, heavy and thick. Outside, cars honked in the distance. Children laughed in the street, but inside, everything felt suspended in time. Her aunt placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Your father loves you, but he must know that his choices have consequences. I will tell him everything, And when he hears that you cried yourself to sleep, I know he will come. Lindiwe stared down at her shoes, broken, worn, mocked. So he'll know about all of this, she whispered. Yes, and maybe it's time he sees what his daughter has endured. That night, after dinner, her aunt stepped outside with her old cell phone. Lindiwe sat by the window, listening through the thin walls as her aunt spoke in a hushed but firm voice. She couldn't make out every word, but she caught enough. Humiliated, torn shoes, teacher shaming her. She tried to hide it, cried herself to sleep. She is just a child. At one point, her aunt's voice trembled. You need to come, Cabello. Your daughter needs you. When the call ended, her aunt came back inside with a strange look on her face. Part relief, part worry, part anticipation. What did he say? Lindiwe asked. Her aunt took her hands. He said he's coming. And he said, he is not coming quietly, ready-wise. Lindiwe didn't understand what that meant, but she felt something stir inside her. A faint flicker of hope, a rising tension in the air. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of man her father truly was, wondering what tomorrow would bring, wondering if anything at all could change her fate. Tomorrow, the world she thought she knew would begin to shift. Tomorrow, the sky over Mbali Heights would thunder with an arrival no one expected, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would remain the same. Night had wrapped itself around the city like a thick velvet curtain when Mr. Cabello finally answered his phone. He had been in his office long after business hours, papers spread across a mahogany desk, city lights glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows like a sea of stars. His empire stretched across the continent: real estate, tech firms, transport companies, investments in multiple countries. His schedule was relentless, his responsibilities overwhelming. But the one thing that could break through the fortress of meetings, contracts, and signatures was the sound of Busiswe's trembling voice on the other end of the line. Cabello, she began, her voice rough with emotion, your daughter is suffering. The moment he heard the word daughter, everything inside him stilled. He leaned back slowly in his leather chair, heart tightening. What happened? He demanded, his tone sharp, controlled, but beneath it, a tremor lurked. There was a pause, a long, painful pause filled with memories of a little girl he had once held in his arms, a girl he had chosen to keep hidden from the world's expectations, hoping she would grow strong without the weight of his wealth crushing her childhood. She was mocked, Aunt Busiswe said, her voice cracking, humiliated in front of an entire classroom. His grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles whitened. By who? Her teacher, her classmates. A shaky breath. They made fun of her shoes, her torn shoes, like she was dirt beneath their feet. The image hit him with the force of a blow. His daughter, standing alone in a room full of ridicule, her tiny shoulders trembling, her eyes filling with shame. He hadn't seen her in months, but he could picture her perfectly, her timid smile, her quiet nature, her gentle innocence. The thought of anyone hurting her lit a fire inside him, blazing through every layer of composure he built as a businessman. Why didn't she tell me? He whispered. Because she didn't want to trouble you, Busiswe replied softly. Because she thinks you're too busy. Because she thinks you won't come. That last line carved straight into his chest. He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back. The city skyline blurred as he walked toward the window, rage pulsing through his veins. Who is this teacher? He demanded. What school? Mbali Heights Private School. A cold, humorless laugh escaped him. The school I sponsor. The school that praises its elite standards. And yet they allow bullying. They humiliate my daughter. She cried herself to sleep. Busiswe said weakly. I found her clutching an old photo of you. Silence fell. He closed his eyes, swallowed hard, and tried to control the storm raging inside him. I should never have stayed away this long, he murmured. I should never have let her bear this alone. You wanted her to grow up humble, Cabello, his sister reminded him gently. Not burdened by your name, not judged by your wealth. And look what humility has cost her, he snapped, then caught himself. His voice softened. I made my daughter invisible, and now she is being treated like she is worthless. Busiswe said nothing. He inhaled deeply. I'm coming. When? Tomorrow morning. Her breath caught. Are you sure? Shouldn't you? No, he said firmly. No more delays. No more distance. My daughter needs me, and I will not allow anyone to shame her again. As he lowered the phone, a feeling washed over him, part regret, part fury, part resolve. He pressed a hand against the glass window, staring at the sprawling city below. Every streetlight, every building, every car represented the world he had built for himself, but none of it meant anything. If his own child lived in pain, he moved quickly after that, picking up his jacket, calling his chief pilot, contacting security, shifting meetings, issuing commands with the clipped efficiency of a man accustomed to absolute authority. By the time he walked out of his office, the plan was already set in motion. Tonight, he would rest only briefly. Tomorrow, he would arrive not as a businessman, not as a benefactor, not as a silent shadow funding the school, but as a father, across the city. In the small rented room, Lindiwe lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling as moonlight filtered through the curtains. Her aunt had fallen asleep, but Lindiwe's mind continued to spin with questions. What kind of man was he? Her father. Why had he chosen to live apart? Why had he chosen this life for her? And most terrifying of all, what would he say when he saw her like this, broken, ashamed, embarrassed by something as small as worn-out shoes? Would he be disappointed? Would he scold her for being weak? Or would he understand? She curled onto her side, gripping the old envelope her aunt had given her. She traced her father's handwriting with gentle fingers. The ink was faded, but the emotion in it felt alive. My little star, it read. Shine in your own time. Shine in your own way. Tears pricked her eyes again. She wanted to believe those words. She wanted to believe she could shine somewhere, somehow. But the cruel reality of Mbali Heights had made her feel smaller each day. The world outside seemed too big, the school too cruel, her shoes too broken, her heart too fragile. She closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet room. I wish you were here. And somewhere across the city, her father whispered the exact same words without knowing. Mr. Cabello barely slept that night. His mind was consumed with images of his daughter alone, embarrassed, mocked, while the teacher responsible stood by with cold disdain. He replayed every detail Busiswe had told him. Each detail made his resolve sharpen. When dawn approached, he rose before the sun and dressed in a crisp suit. Not for business, but for a statement. He needed the school to know exactly who they had wronged. His driver greeted him downstairs, but he waved him off. No car today, he said. Prepare the helicopter. The driver's eyes widened. Sir, the school's grounds. They can make room. Security was briefed. The pilot prepared for takeoff. Within an hour, he was airborne, cutting through the early morning sky as the city below shrank into a mosaic of rooftops and roads. The blades of the helicopter thundered like a heartbeat, loud, determined, unstoppable. He looked out the window, expression carved from steel. I'm coming, my little star, he whispered, and no one will ever make you feel small again. Back in her room, Lindiwe tied the torn shoes carefully, weaving the laces through frayed holes. She stared at her feet, as though the shoes were responsible for every wound she carried. But then she took a deep breath, stood up, and told herself she could survive another day. She didn't know that survival was no longer needed. She didn't know the world was already shifting in her favor. She didn't know the sky itself was about to announce the arrival of the man she had longed for, the man the school would never forget. The sun had only just begun to rise when Mr. Cabello's helicopter approached the outskirts of the city. Inside, he sat upright, gaze locked on the horizon. His expression was firm, unreadable, the look of a man who had made a decision he would not reverse. Every rotation of the blades felt like a countdown to justice, to revelation, to a moment that would reshape his daughter's world forever. But miles away, in a tiny rented room that smelled faintly of soap and early morning porridge, Lindy Wei was just beginning her day the way she always did, quietly, timidly, preparing herself for another battle she didn't believe she could win. She dressed in her worn uniform, smoothing the faded fabric with trembling hands. When she reached for her shoes, she hesitated. The tear had spread even further. The sole was detaching slightly near the heel. They looked worse today, perhaps worse than ever. Her aunt watched her from the small table, worry shadowing her face. "You don't have to go today," Aunt Busiswe said gently. "You can stay home, rest. Let me talk to the school." Lindy Wei shook her head quickly. "No, I don't want them to think I'm running away. I'll be fine." "You're brave," her aunt whispered. "But bravery shouldn't be your burden every day." Lindy Wei didn't answer. She slipped the shoes on carefully, wincing when the rough edges scraped her skin. Then she picked up her school bag, hugged her aunt tightly, and stepped out into the cool morning air. As she walked down the familiar road toward the taxi stop, she felt the dread deepen inside her. Today would be no different. The whispers would return, the laughter, the judgment, the teacher's cold voice telling her she was not good enough. She didn't know how much longer she could endure it. At the school gates, wealthy students poured out of polished cars. Parents in luxurious outfits kissed their children goodbye. Chatter filled the air, casual, effortless conversations about holidays, gadgets, birthday parties, designer shoes. And then there was her, a scholarship girl with torn shoes and heavy eyes. As she crossed the courtyard, several students nudged each other, already noticing her shoes again. She lowered her head, shoulders hunching, heart pounding painfully. But while she felt herself shrinking, far above the school, the helicopter carrying her father was approaching with roaring certainty. Back in his helicopter, Mr. Cabello reviewed the information he had received overnight. His assistant had pulled the school's full staff list, student records, disciplinary policies, and even the list of beneficiaries of his anonymous donations. His jaw clenched when he saw the name Ms. Dlamini marked as one of the teachers whose salary had partially been supported by the scholarship fund he established. "So she mocks my daughter while living off my generosity," he muttered, fury darkening his tone. His assistant nodded nervously through the headset. "Sir, should we notify the school of your arrival?" "No," Cabello said sharply. "Let them greet me unprepared. Let them show their true colors." He paused, then added, "Contact the principal. Tell him I want an urgent meeting at the school this morning. Do not reveal my identity." "Yes, sir." He leaned back, breathing deeply, forcing himself into the calm before the storm. "Today," he whispered, "they learn the value of a child's dignity." Meanwhile, the principal of Mbali Heights, Mr. Radebe, was in his office reviewing documents when he received the call. An urgent meeting," he repeated, startled. "With which parent?" The caller didn't say. The secretary replied anxiously. "Only that he is an investor and will be arriving this morning." An investor. The word alone sent the principal into a flurry of anxious preparation. Investors were the lifeblood of the school. Parents with money, influence, and authority held power even he had to respect. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "prepare refreshments, straighten the conference room, and notify the staff." He stood abruptly and adjusted his tie, unaware of how drastically the balance of power was about to shift. Inside the classroom, the first bell rang. Students shuffled in, gossiping about weekend plans. Naledi strutted to her seat as though the room was her kingdom. When she spotted Lindy Wei sitting quietly in her corner, she smirked. "So the shoes again," she said loudly. "I'd offer to buy you new ones, but I don't donate to lost causes." Her friends burst into giggles before anyone could respond. Ms. Dlamini entered the room, her heels striking the floor with practiced authority. Her eyes fell on Lindy Wei almost immediately. "You," she said sharply, pointing a manicured finger. "Come forward." Lindy Wei froze, her heart hammered against her ribs. Slowly, she stood and walked to the front of the classroom, every step placing the torn shoes further into the spotlight. "Look at your uniform," the teacher said loudly, ensuring every student could hear. "Look at your shoes. Do you understand that you represent this institution? That you reflect on us all? How many times must I repeat myself?" Murmurs rippled through the class. Toomey lowered his head, fists clenched in quiet anger. Naledi smirked triumphantly, and Lindiwe felt her throat close, the humiliation suffocating her. I'm trying, ma'am," she whispered. Not trying hard enough," the teacher snapped. "Next time you come here looking like this, you will be sent home." The words struck like lightning. Humiliation burned her eyes. Shame curled through her chest. She nodded silently and returned to her seat, though her legs felt like they might give way beneath her. But before the teacher could continue her lecture, something unexpected happened. A strange, distant rumbling shook the windows. Students looked up. Another rumble, louder this time, vibrated through the floor. "What is that noise?" someone whispered. The rumble grew stronger. Even Ms. Dlamini paused mid-sentence. The classroom lights flickered briefly. Then, suddenly, a deafening roar filled the sky overhead. Students ran to the windows. Toomey's eyes widened. Naledi gasped. From the corner of her desk, Lindiwe's breath caught in her throat. Descending from the clouds, directly toward the school field, was a sleek, black helicopter. Polished, powerful, impossible to ignore. Its blades tore through the air with authority, casting ripples across the school grounds. Teachers rushed outside in confusion. Students screamed with excitement. The courtyard erupted into chaos as dust swirled and wind whipped through the walkways. In the front office, the principal's phone rang, his secretary shouting over the noise. "Sir, he's here. The investor, he's arriving in a helicopter." A helicopter. At school. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Inside the classroom, wind rattled the windows violently as the helicopter touched down on the sports field. Students pressed their faces against the glass. Naledi whispered, Who arrives like that?" But only one student sat, frozen, her heart pounding, her palms sweating, her eyes glued to the descending aircraft as though time itself had stopped. Lindiwe. She didn't know the man stepping out of that helicopter was coming for her. She didn't know this moment would rewrite the story of her life. She only felt one thing. The world was shifting, and it had begun with the sound of a helicopter blade slicing through the morning sky. Lindiwe's morning had already begun with a familiar heaviness, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited. She stood outside her classroom, her back against the wall, gripping her books tightly, while students buzzed about the mysterious helicopter that had landed on the school field. The air vibrated with excitement, confusion, and speculation. "Maybe it's a government minister," someone whispered. No, it must be a celebrity," another argued. "My mom said only billionaires travel like that," a boy added with wide eyes. But as thrilling as it was for everyone else, for Lindiwe it only added to the anxiety twisting inside her. Big events at this school never favored students like her. She just wanted to stay out of the way, stay silent, stay invisible, anything to avoid another round of humiliation. Still, she had no idea the morning storm was only beginning. When the bell rang, she walked into the classroom quietly, hoping to slip into her seat unnoticed. But hope rarely served her here. Miss Dlamini stood at the front of the room, more tense than usual. Perhaps she was anxious about the sudden arrival of the important visitor, or perhaps she was irritated by the disruption. Either way, the teacher's irritation quickly found its usual target. "You," she said sharply, pointing at Lindiwe the moment she stepped inside. Lindiwe froze. "Yes, you. Come here." A hush fell across the room. Students leaned forward, sensing fresh entertainment. Lindiwe approached hesitantly, feeling exposed and fragile. Ms. Dlamini lowered her voice but kept it loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at your shoes." She pointed again at the torn seams, the peeling edges. "I told you yesterday this cannot continue." Lindiwe swallowed. I tried to fix them, ma'am. Clearly not hard enough," the teacher snapped. Then her voice rose again. If you cannot afford new shoes, then perhaps you should question whether this school is the right place for you. We cannot lower our standards for one student. A cruel silence followed. The words hit her harder than she expected, not because they were new, but because today she felt like she had no strength left to shield herself. Toomey shifted in his seat, outrage darkening his expression. He opened his mouth to speak, but the fear of challenging authority tightened around him like a rope. He closed it again, helpless. Naledi and her friends smirked as though savoring a familiar flavor. As if sensing the shift in energy outside, the ground vibrated faintly, and the windows rattled once more. Students glanced toward them, murmuring, but Ms. Dlamini wasn't finished. "Step outside," she ordered. "I won't have you distracting my lesson." A gasp went through the class. Even Naledi looked surprised. Sending a student outside before the lesson even started was an extreme measure. Lindiwe's heart sank. She turned toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she stepped into the hallway, the air felt colder somehow. She leaned against the wall, forcing her tears back. Why is it always me? She wondered. Why does it hurt so much? Why do they keep punishing me for something I cannot change? She stared down at her shoes, the same ones her mother had bought for her years ago before she passed. They had been a symbol of love once. Now they felt like chains dragging her deeper into misery. Inside the classroom, the students sat uneasily. Even those who enjoyed mocking others sensed something different in the air today. A tension neither they nor their teacher understood. Then something happened that silenced every thought. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, not hurried, but strong, deliberate, and confident. Footsteps of someone who had never been questioned a day in his life. Lindiwe heard them too. She lifted her head. The footsteps came closer, growing louder. Then the classroom door opened. The room froze. Standing in the doorway was a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit, flanked by 2 security personnel. His presence filled the entire space, not just with wealth, but with authority carved from years of commanding empires. Students gasped. Even Naledi straightened in her seat. But the person most affected was Ms. Dlamini. Her face paled instantly, and her sharp posture wilted like a flower exposed to harsh heat. "Good morning," the man said, his voice deep, calm, impossibly controlled. The principal appeared behind him, sweating nervously. "Class, this is an honored guest," he stammered. "A very important investor who has come for—" The man raised a hand, silencing him with effortless power. "No need for introductions," the man said. "I'm here for one reason." His eyes swept across the room, passing over shaking students, confused faces until they landed squarely on the empty seat in the back corner. A student raised her hand timidly. "Sir, if you're looking for someone, she was sent outside." The man's jaw tightened. "Outside," he repeated slowly, as though the word itself was offensive. "Yes," Naledi said with forced sweetness. "Our teacher didn't want her to embarrass." The man didn't let her finish. His eyes flashed sharply, causing Naledi to shrink back. "Show me," he said. The entire class held its breath as he stepped back into the hallway, and there, leaning against the wall, shoulders trembling, wiping her eyes quickly so no one would see, was Lindiwe. Her breath caught the second she saw him. He paused. For a moment, neither of them moved. He stared at her as though time had stopped, and she stared back in disbelief, her mind struggling to process the impossible truth forming before her. He stepped forward slowly, gently, until he stood directly in front of her. "Lindiwe," he said softly, his voice cracking just slightly. She blinked, stunned. Dad." The hallway fell silent. Her father exhaled shakily, the fury melting from his features, replaced by raw emotion he had buried for years. "My little star," he whispered. "What have they done to you?" Her book slipped from her hands as she lunged forward, collapsing into his embrace. His arms wrapped around her tightly, protectively, as though he could shield her from every pain she had ever endured. And for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Students peered from the classroom, jaws dropped. No one spoke, no one moved. Miss Dlamini appeared in the doorway, trembling. She had not expected this. She had not expected anything that followed. Cabello pulled back slightly and looked at his daughter's shoes, torn, worn, humiliated. His expression hardened into steel. "Take me to the teacher," he said. Lindy Wei swallowed, fear prickling her skin. "Dad, please, don't." But he placed a gentle hand on her cheek. "No one shames my daughter, not ever again." He turned toward the class, toward the teacher, toward the system that had failed her. And the storm he carried with him was only just beginning. Behind them, the helicopter blades still echoed faintly in the distance, like a heartbeat, signaling that the world had changed. Forever. The moment her father stepped back into the classroom, the energy shifted so dramatically it felt like the air itself tightened. Students who had been whispering moments before fell silent. Even the sound of the helicopter's fading echo seemed to hush out of respect or fear for the presence standing before them. Mr. Cabello walked with a controlled, powerful stride, one hand resting protectively on Lindue's shoulder. She followed beside him quietly, her heartbeat rattling in her ears. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of her father confronting the teacher or of the attention now suffocating her from every direction. Inside the classroom, all eyes widened, Naledi's face drained of color. Toomey sat frozen, disbelief and awe battling in his expression. And at the front of the room, Ms. Dlamini stood as rigid as a pillar, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. She had known many wealthy parents throughout her career, but none had ever arrived in a helicopter, flanked by security, to storm into her class with fury blazing in their eyes. The principal hovered behind them, sweating nervously, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. He chose the latter. Cabello stopped in front of the teacher's desk. His expression was calm, too calm, like the deadly stillness before a storm rips open the sky. "You," he said quietly, "are the one who humiliated my daughter." Ms. Dlamini swallowed hard. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," he repeated, his voice laced with steel. He turned briefly toward Lindiwe. She flinched, thinking he might be angry with her, but instead he softened, just slightly. He looked at her shoes again, the torn seams, the exhausted soles. Then he faced the teacher fully. "This," he said, pointing at the shoes, "is what you found worthy of public ridicule. This is what you chose to attack. A child doing her best with what she has." Her jaw trembled. "I was enforcing school appearance policies." "No," he interrupted sharply. "You were enforcing cruelty." A thick silence fell. He took a slow step forward, and she stepped back instinctively. "You told her she did not belong," he said. "You told her she should reconsider her place here." "You made my daughter," his voice cracked, "cry herself to sleep." A faint murmur rippled through the class. Some students looked ashamed. Others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Naledi stared at the floor. Toomey watched with quiet resolve. I only wanted to maintain standards." The teacher tried again. "Standards," Cabello repeated, voice cold. "And which standard dictates that a teacher should shame a girl for being poor?" She stuttered. "I didn't mean." "You didn't mean," he snapped. "Your words broke her. Your actions taught this entire room that poverty is something to mock, that a child is less worthy because of her shoes." His voice thundered across the classroom, each word landing like a judgment passed from a higher court. "And that," he finished, "is unacceptable." Ms. Dlamini looked around for support, but she found none. Even the principal avoided her gaze. For the first time in her career, her authority, her power crumbled right beneath her feet. But Cabello wasn't finished. He turned toward the students. "How many of you laughed at her?" he asked. No one answered. "Raise your hands if you mocked her. I want to see who thought tormenting a girl was entertaining." Hands stayed down, but the guilt in the room was palpable. "You are children," he said, "but cruelty grows fast when adults encourage it. Remember this day when you become adults yourselves." A few heads lowered in shame. Then he stepped aside and gently nudged Lindiwe forward. "Tell them," he said quietly. "Tell them how you felt." Her eyes widened. Dad, He kneeled slightly, so they were eye to eye. My little star, your voice matters. Let it be heard. Her throat tightened. She looked at her classmates, her teacher people who had torn her apart for days. Her hands trembled, but then she saw Tumi nod encouragingly. She drew a shaky breath. I felt, she began softly, small. The room went still. I felt like I didn't belong here, like no matter how hard I study or how respectful I am, I will always be judged by something I cannot change. A few students shifted uncomfortably. I know my shoes are torn, she continued, voice cracking. I know I don't have nice things like all of you, but I try. I really try. Her gaze landed on her teacher. And you made me feel worthless. A single tear slipped down her cheek. But she didn't wipe it away. Behind her, her father's face hardened with fury and pride all at once. Ms. Dlamini's lips trembled. For the first time, she looked like someone realizing she had done something unforgivable. I didn't know, she whispered weakly. I didn't realize how much it hurt you. Cabello stepped forward again. You didn't know, he said quietly. Because you didn't care to know. She flinched. He turned to the principal. Is this the kind of leadership you allow in your school? The principal panicked. Sir, please, we value every student here. Yet you allow teachers to bully them, he cut in sharply. You accept mockery as discipline. You permit a culture where wealth determines value. No, of course not. Then act like it. Silence suffocated the room. Then, with chilling calm, he delivered the blow that changed everything. I am the school's anonymous benefactor. Gasps exploded across the classroom. Even Ms. Dlamini stumbled backward slightly. Yes, he continued. My donations built your library. My funds support your scholarships, including hers, and her teacher's salary. The teacher visibly crumpled. And today, he said, I nearly withdrew every cent. The principal looked as though his knees might give out. But then I realized something, Cabello added. This school doesn't need less money. It needs more accountability. His gaze swept over the room. It needs to learn that respect is worth more than wealth, that dignity cannot be purchased, and that no child should be shamed for the clothes on their back or the shoes on their feet. A powerful silence followed. Then he took Lindiwe's hand gently. Come, he said softly. There's something else we must do. He led her outside, past the stunned students, past the trembling teacher, past the principal who dared not breathe too loudly. Every step echoed like a declaration. Students poured out of classrooms to watch. The helicopter still rested on the field, its blades still, its body gleaming beneath the morning sun like a symbol of impossibility. Cabello stopped at the edge of the field and turned to his daughter. Do you know why I came in a helicopter? He asked quietly. She shook her head. Because I wanted everyone to look at you, he said gently. Not with shame, but with awe. She gasped softly. You deserve to be seen, he continued, not mocked. Not belittled, seen. Tears filled her eyes again, but these tears were different. He placed a hand on her back. Walk with me. They walked across the field together, father and daughter, side by side, as the entire school watched in stunned silence. And for the first time since she arrived at Mbali Heights, Lindiwe didn't feel small. She felt seen. She felt protected. She felt valued. But the confrontation inside was just the beginning. The real storm, what her father would demand next, had not yet been unleashed. The field was silent, except for the faint ticking of the helicopter's cooling engine. Students gathered along the edges, frozen in place, their faces etched with confusion, awe, and a growing sense that they were witnessing something monumental, something that would be retold for years like a legend born in daylight. Lindiwe stood beside her father, torn between disbelief and embarrassment. She had never imagined he would come like this, descending from the sky as though he were a character in a movie. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. For someone who had spent months trying to be invisible, the sudden attention felt overwhelming. Her father sensed her discomfort. Without speaking, he rested a reassuring hand on her back, a protective gesture that said more than words could. She inhaled shakily, grounding herself in his presence. The principal hurried across the field, panting, trying to compose himself before reaching them. Behind him trailed several teachers, including Ms. Dlamini, whose hands shook so noticeably she clasped them together to hide the tremor. The closer she came, the more her confidence dissolved. "Sir," Principal Radabe began breathlessly, "we are honored, truly honored to have you here. Had we known, you didn't need to know." Cabello interrupted, voice calm but icy. "Your actions should have been honorable regardless of who was watching." The principal swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. Of course." Other teachers murmured behind him, exchanging uneasy looks. Only Toomey stood at a distance, watching with quiet satisfaction. As for Naledi, she lingered behind her friends, suddenly unsure of the footing she once believed unshakable. Cabello shifted his attention to the crowd that had formed. His towering presence commanded the space effortlessly, even without raising his voice. "I came here today," he began, "not as a businessman, not as an investor, but as a father." The words rippled through the field. A father who entrusted this institution to care for his child. A father who believed education should uplift, not destroy. A father who discovered much too late that his daughter shed tears alone because of the cruelty of those who should have guided her. His gaze fell on Ms. Dlamini. She stiffened as though his stare were a physical force. He took a slow step toward her. "You humiliated my daughter." Her lips parted, but no sound escaped. "You took a child, a quiet child, and placed her shame on display for your own authority." I was enforcing policy," she whispered weakly. He leaned in slightly. "Policy is not an excuse for cruelty." Her breath wavered. "You mocked her shoes," he continued. "Shoes, a piece of leather and stitching, something that should never outweigh a child's dignity." Every pair of eyes turned to Lindiway's worn shoes, their torn edges suddenly symbolic of far more than poverty. "You saw a tear in her shoe," he said, and decided it justified tearing her spirit. A hush fell across the field. Then he straightened. "And now, the whole school will hear what you refuse to see." He gestured to Lindiway. "Come stand beside me, my daughter." She stepped forward timidly, eyes downcast. He softened as he turned toward her. "Lift your chin." She did. Her father faced the crowd again. "This girl, this gentle, hard-working child is my daughter. And today, you made the mistake of thinking her worth rested on the condition of her shoes." Gasps echoed through the students. The statement carried weight, every syllable slicing through the shallow foundations of judgments made all year. "If her shoes are worn," he said passionately, "it does not mean she is lesser. It means she has walked far." A shaky breath escaped Lindiway's lips. Her father continued, voice rising like thunder. "She has walked through hardship. She has walked through grief. She has walked through your classrooms, your hallways, your expectations, and she has done so with humility and strength." Students exchanged glances, the gravity of his words sinking in. "But you," he said, pointing directly at Ms. Dlamini, "chose to step on her path instead of helping her walk it." She wilted under his gaze. The principal attempted to intervene. "Sir, we truly," Cabello raised a hand. "I'm not done." The principal fell silent. He turned toward the entire staff and student body. "Do you know who funds the scholarship program here? Who paid for half the renovations in your science wing? Who donated the computers in your labs?" Students murmured. They had never known. Teachers exchanged glances of realization. "I did," he said simply. "I have invested millions into this school." Stunned silence followed. "But today," he said firmly, "I would burn every check before allowing my daughter to be treated like she is beneath anyone." Ms. Dlamini's breath caught. "Sir, I never intended." "It doesn't matter what you intended," he cut in. "What matters is what you did." Her eyes filled with panic. "And now," he said, "you will answer for it." The principal stepped forward cautiously. "We can resolve this." "We will resolve it," Cabello said coldly. but not by sweeping it under the rug. He faced the teacher again. You owe her an apology. Not tomorrow. Not in private. Now, here. Students held their breath. Ms. Dlamini stared at the ground. Her pride, a fragile wall, crumbling under the weight of shame. Her voice shook. I am sorry. Look at her, he said sternly. She lifted her eyes, trembling. I'm sorry, Lindiwe, she choked out. I failed you as a teacher. I let my judgment overshadow my compassion. And I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. Whispers swept through the crowd. For the first time, the teacher who wielded control like a weapon now stood exposed before her students, not powerful, not superior, but human. Lindiwe stared at her, unsure how to respond. Her heart felt tangled, hurt, relief, confusion. But her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder again. You do not have to forgive her today, he murmured, but you deserve to hear the apology. She nodded quietly. Then Cabello addressed the principal. This school needs change. Culture, policy, leadership. I'll personally oversee it. Either you reform this place or my funding disappears today. The principal nodded vigorously, terrified. Yes, sir. Immediately. A wave of astonishment rippled across the field. Then, with a softer tone, he turned to his daughter. There is one last thing. He crouched slightly to meet her gaze. I came here to remind you of something I forgot to say often enough. She blinked, tears trembling. You are worthy, he whispered. Not because of money, not because of where you come from. You are worthy because of your heart. Her tears fell freely now. He stood and gestured toward the helicopter. Come, let's leave this place for a moment. You've had enough suffering for one lifetime. With present. The crowd parted as the two of them walked toward the aircraft, her hand in his. For the first time since she arrived at Mbali Heights, students looked at her not with mockery but with awe, respect, and quiet regret. Some even whispered, she deserved better. And as the helicopter blades began to turn again, lifting dust and petals into the air, one thing became undeniable. The girl who had once been invisible now stood in the center of a story the whole school would never forget. The helicopter lifted off the ground with a slow, commanding rise, sending whirlwinds of dust and petals spiraling through the air. Students shielded their eyes, teachers backed away, and the entire school watched with suspended breath as the machine carried Lindiwe and her father upward, away from the bruising weight of humiliation that had once caged her. Inside the helicopter, the noise was loud but strangely comforting. Steady, powerful, reassuring. Lindiwe sat beside her father, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She stared down at the shrinking school below, unsure whether she should feel relieved, terrified, or guilty. Her father glanced at her, studying the quiet storm behind her eyes. You're safe now, he said gently. She nodded, though her voice trembled with doubt. Dad, what will happen when I go back? He was silent for a moment. Choosing his words carefully, when you return, he said firmly, you will walk with your head high, and no one, no teacher, no student will dare make you feel small again. She looked down at her feet, the torn shoes sitting awkwardly against the polished helicopter floor. But everyone saw, everything. Yes, he said, and perhaps that is exactly what they needed to see. She exhaled shakily. I didn't want to cause trouble. You didn't, he replied. They caused trouble when they forgot their humanity. The helicopter soared beyond the school grounds, past rooftops and highways, toward the beating heart of the city. Lindiwe gazed out the window. The city stretching below like a vast, glittering maze. She had lived her entire life within its simplest corners, never imagining she would ever rise above its noise, let alone see it from the sky. Her father watched her in silence, guilt tightening his chest. He had told himself that keeping her away from his world of wealth would protect her. He had believed humility would build strength, but now he wondered whether he had simply abandoned her to hardship she was too young to bear. I should have been there, he murmured suddenly. She turned to him. What do you mean? I thought I was teaching you resilience, he confessed, voice heavy. I thought hardship would shape your character, make you strong, independent, grounded. A pause. But I forgot that even strong children need support. They need protection. They need love, not distance. Her eyes softened. She hadn't expected him to speak with such vulnerability. He continued. I wanted to give you the childhood I never had, one free from wealth's poison. But instead, I left you alone in a world that punished you for not having what I withheld. Tears prickled at her eyes again. Dad, I never blamed you. He looked at her with pain and gratitude tangled inside his gaze. Even when you should have. She shook her head gently. You're my father. I always believed you had a reason. His throat tightened. I did. But I also made mistakes. And today, I saw just how deeply those mistakes cut. She reached for his hand, a small, hesitant gesture. He squeezed her fingers softly, a silent promise forming between them. The helicopter began descending toward a rooftop helipad atop a tall glass building as headquarters. When they stepped out, a team of polished executives rushed forward, bowing slightly in greeting. Sir, welcome back? He waved them off. Not now. They nodded and retreated immediately. Lindyway looked around, awestruck. The city stretched endlessly beneath them. The wind carried the scent of sky and stone, and the distant hum of traffic. She felt small in the vastness, but not the kind of small she had felt at school. This was the kind of small that made you aware of how big the world was, how full of possibilities. Her father guided her inside the building. Everything gleamed: marble floors, golden railings, paintings that looked older than time. Employees paused to stare as they passed. Some whispered among themselves, recognizing the similarity in their eyes. He led her into his private office, a luxurious space lined with books, awards, and floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto the skyline. A leather couch sat on one side, and a massive desk dominated the other. Lindyway stood near the window, taking it all in. You live like this, she whispered. He smiled faintly. This is only my office, not my home. She turned to him. Then why? Why didn't you let me live with you? His smile faded. He walked to the window beside her. Because I was afraid. Afraid. Of what? Of losing you to the world that nearly destroyed me. His voice was low. When I was young, money corrupted everything around me. Relationships, trust, kindness. People only loved what I had, not who I was. I didn't want that for you. He paused. I thought giving you a life of simplicity would give you something pure, something untouched by greed or expectation. She lowered her gaze. But I suffered for it, and I will never forgive myself for that, he whispered. He placed a hand over her small, worn shoes. These shoes, these hurt me more than you know. Her eyes widened. He knelt down not as a billionaire, not as a powerful man, but as a father whose love had stumbled but never dissolved. He touched the torn leather gently, as though touching something sacred. You walked through pain in these, he said, and I wasn't there to stop it. She blinked back a tear. I'm okay. Dad, you shouldn't have had to be okay, he replied. You should have been cherished. He stood slowly. Today, I want to change that, completely. She frowned softly. What do you mean? I want you to come live with me, he said. Not as a secret, not as someone hidden in the shadows, as my daughter, fully, proudly. Her breath caught. And as for your schooling, he continued, you will choose where to study. If you wish to stay at Mbali Heights, I will ensure it becomes a place worthy of you. If you want a different school, I will transfer you immediately. Whatever you need, I will provide. She shook her head slightly. Dad, I don't need a different school. I just want to feel safe, and you will. He promised, starting today. He walked to his desk and pressed an intercom button. Prepare the press room, she startled. Press room. Yes, he replied. I am announcing you publicly as my daughter. No more hiding. No more shame. What? She yelped, panicked. No, Dad. I don't want everyone will know. He approached her gently. My little star. Your fear comes from how they treated you when they thought you were alone. But you are not alone anymore. She trembled. They'll treat me differently. Yes, he said softly, with respect. She hesitated, then lowered her eyes. I don't want them to respect me because of you. He paused. Then let them learn to respect you because of who you are, he whispered, and let me protect you while you teach them who that is. A tear slid down her cheek. She nodded slowly. He embraced her tightly. Then he said with unwavering certainty, it's time they understand the worth of the girl they underestimated. Far below the skyscraper, the city hummed, unaware of the storm of truth that was about to break open. But at the school, whispers already spread like wildfire. She left with him. She's really his daughter. Is he the billionaire? Did he say apology, reform? What's going to happen to the teacher? Change had begun. And the world that once crushed her was about to bow. For the rest of that morning, the city outside pulsed with its usual rhythm traffic, weaving through narrow streets. Vendors calling out their prices, office buildings lighting up with activity. But inside Caballo's headquarters, a very different energy filled the air. Something monumental was unfolding. Something that would send ripples far beyond a private school courtyard. In the press room, technicians adjusted cameras. Journalists hurried to set up their equipment, and executives whispered to one another with barely contained curiosity. No one had expected a sudden announcement from one of the nation's most private, powerful businessmen. Whenever Cabello spoke publicly, it was always for massive deals, corporate milestones, or philanthropic missions. Never anything personal, and certainly nothing involving a child. Yet the moment they received the message, prepare the press room, urgent, everyone understood instinctively. This was not business. This was something deeper. Upstairs, in his office, Cabello helped his daughter sit on the couch. She had never been inside a room this grand, with leather cushions so soft they seemed to sigh under her weight. She looked around anxiously, twisting her fingers. Is all this necessary? She whispered. Yes, he said simply, because truth deserves light. And your story has spent enough time in shadows. She lowered her gaze. But I don't want people to look at me differently. He knelt in front of her again. The world already looked at you differently. They judged you by your shoes, your silence, your struggle. Now they will see you by your truth. She swallowed hard. What if they say I don't belong with you, that I'm too ordinary? A sad smile touched his lips. You are extraordinary, and I will not allow anyone to convince you otherwise. He paused, brushing away a loose tear from her cheek. You were never the one who needed to change. The world was. Before she could reply, the door opened carefully. His assistant entered, bowing his head. Sir, the press room is ready. They're waiting. Cabello nodded. Give us a moment. The assistant left, closing the door behind him. Cabello turned back to his daughter. Are you ready? She shook her head. No. Then I will walk with you, he said. That's enough. He offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Together, they walked toward the elevator. Each step felt heavier, yet somehow empowering, as though a lifetime of being overlooked was melting away. The elevator descended slowly. The numbers blinked one by one. Lindy felt her heart pounding, her palms sweating, but she kept holding her father's hand, drawing strength from his calm presence. When the doors opened, a wave of murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Cameras shifted, microphones angled forward. Journalists straightened with anticipation. Cabello guided her gently to the podium. Standing beside her, flashbulbs erupted instantly. She startled, but he steadied her with a light touch on her shoulder. He spoke first. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, he began, voice steady, resonant. Today, I am not here to speak as a businessman, nor as a public figure. I am here to speak as a father. The room quieted. A father who made mistakes. A father who believed distance would protect his daughter. A father who now understands that love must never hide. He stepped aside slightly so the cameras could see her more clearly. This, he said with quiet pride, is my daughter, Lindy. A collective gasp swept across the room. Some journalists nearly dropped their pens. Others exchanged stunned whispers. Cabello continued. For years, I have supported schools across the nation. I have built programs meant to uplift underprivileged children. But even as I worked to change the world, I failed to see how the world had treated my own child. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. My daughter was humiliated, mocked, shamed for something no child should ever be ashamed of. His voice deepened with sorrow and fury. She was judged by her poverty. Poverty I chose for her, believing it would build humility. But I did not consider the cruelty of those who would weaponize it against her. A murmur of shock rippled through the room. She cried herself to sleep, he continued, his voice thickening. And while she endured pain, I lived in comfort. While she walked in broken shoes, I walked in polished power. While she was alone, I was absent. He faced the cameras more directly. This ends today. Lindiwe stared at him, eyes widened. She had never seen a powerful man apologize so openly, not in a way that revealed vulnerability, but in a way that reclaimed dignity. Cabello continued. I am here to hold myself accountable, and I am also here to hold accountable those who harmed her. Journalists scribbled furiously. I expect reforms at Mbali Heights Private School, not simply an apology, but systemic change. Training, compassion policies, anti-bullying programs, leadership restructuring, and above all respect. He glanced at his daughter. No child should ever suffer because of what they lack. He stepped back slightly. Lindiwe, would you like to say something? Her eyes widened in panic. Dad, I can't. I'll mess up. They'll laugh. No, he interrupted gently. No one here will laugh at you. She hesitated, shaking, but he placed her hands on the podium, covering her fingers with his own. Just breathe and be yourself. She closed her eyes, inhaled shakily, and spoke. My name is Lindiwe, she began softly. The room leaned forward to hear her. I didn't know my father would come today. I didn't know I mattered enough for anyone to listen. Her voice trembled, but she continued. I've been afraid for a long time. Afraid to speak. Afraid to stand out. Afraid to be seen. I thought if I stayed quiet, the cruelty would stop, but it didn't. A tear fell onto the podium. My teacher, my classmates, they made me feel like I was nothing, like broken shoes, meant a broken person. Journalists' eyes softened, some even glistening. But today, she whispered, I realized something. She looked up, meeting the cameras with a courage she didn't know she had. I am not broken. Silence. I am not worthless. Silence. And I am not ashamed. A spark lit inside her, a spark that had been waiting for this moment. I didn't need a helicopter, she said, voice growing stronger. I needed someone to see me. Her father wiped a tear from his eye. And now, she added, I want every child who feels invisible to know they matter too. The room broke into applause, loud, emotional, sincere. It overwhelmed her. She stepped back into her father's arms. Trembling with relief, he held her tightly. You were brilliant, he whispered. Braver than anyone I've met. As the press conference ended, journalists surged forward with questions, but Cabello shielded his daughter gently. She said all that needs to be said, he declared. They exited through a private corridor, leaving the building buzzing with shock, admiration, and headlines already forming. Billionaire reveals secret daughter demands. School reforms. Girl mocked for broken shoes, speaks out. I am not broken. Minus. Education system under fire after emotional testimony. As they rode the elevator back up, Lindiwe let out a shaky laugh. I can't believe I did that, she whispered. Her father grinned proudly. I can. She leaned into him. For the first time in her life, she felt something beautiful, power, and she didn't need money to feel it. She needed truth. Outside, the entire country had just heard hers. When the elevator doors slid open once more into the top floor of Cabello's headquarters, the atmosphere felt remarkably different. Something had lifted some invisible weight that had sat on Lindyway's shoulders for years. She wasn't sure whether it was the speech she had managed to deliver, or the warmth of her father's hand on her back, or simply the relief of finally being seen. Whatever it was, she felt lighter, even as exhaustion tugged at her bones. Her father guided her back into his office, closing the door gently behind them. "Sit, my little star," he said softly. She sank into the leather couch, trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief. "Do you think I did okay?" He laughed softly, a sound full of genuine pride. "You didn't just do okay. You changed the world in 5 minutes." She flushed, embarrassed. "I don't think it was that big." "Oh, but it was," he said, standing tall, hands clasped behind his back as he looked out over the city skyline. "Courage is contagious, and today you showed a kind of courage adults twice your age struggle to find." She stared at him, amazed. She had never seen him like this, soft, vulnerable, proud in a way that made her chest warm. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed sharply on the desk. He checked the screen, his eyebrows rising. "The principal," he said. "Calling already," he answered, putting it on speaker. "Sir?" Principal Radeba's voice spilled out, frantic and breathy. "The board wants to speak with you immediately. They say reforms are needed immediately, and they want your input personally." Cabello remained calm. "And the teacher?" A pause. She's in my office," the principal said nervously, "waiting to discuss disciplinary actions. And the students? They're still talking about the speech. I've never seen them so reflective. Some are asking how they can help with the new kindness program. Others want to formally apologize to your daughter." Lindyway stiffened slightly. "I don't want them to pretend they care just because of who you are." Her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You won't have to accept anything that feels false." He spoke back into the phone. "I will come to the school shortly, prepare the board, and the teacher." He ended the call. Then he turned to Lindyway. "We will face them together." She swallowed nervously. "Going back? Today?" "Yes," he said simply. "The wound is still fresh. That is when healing takes root." She nodded slowly, uncertain but trusting him. The drive back to Umbali Heights was unlike anything the school had ever seen. An armored car escorted them. Security vehicles followed. The school gates, normally proud and unbothered, swung open with frantic urgency. Students gathered instantly, whispering excitedly as the convoy approached. Teachers huddled near the entrance, unsure where to stand or what expression to wear. Lindyway remained close to her father as they stepped out of the car. She felt eyes piercing into her from every direction. Curiosity, guilt, admiration, confusion. It was overwhelming, but her father walked tall beside her, his hand steady on her back, shielding her from the weight of public scrutiny. Inside the principal's office, the entire school board sat waiting. Tension thickened the air. Beside them sat Miss Dlamini, her posture stiff, her face pale, her confidence shattered. She looked like someone who had spent the morning drowning in her own regret. The principal stood first. "Sir, thank you for coming. We are not here for ceremonial words," Cabello interrupted calmly. "We are here to address harm." Silence fell. He stepped aside so Lindyway could sit, but she shook her head. She chose to stand beside him, not behind him. He nodded once, silently proud. Facing the board, he began, "Your school prides itself on excellence, yet excellence without compassion becomes cruelty, and cruelty, when unchecked, becomes culture." Board members exchanged uneasy glances. Cabello continued, "Your culture allowed a teacher to humiliate a child. Your culture allowed students to mock her without consequence. Your culture made my daughter afraid to come to school." One board member cleared his throat nervously. "We acknowledge the mistake and are prepared to take action." "Mistake," Cabello said sharply. "Mistakes are accidental." This was a pattern. Ms. Dlamini flinched. "Now," Cabello said, "before I decide whether my funding remains, I want to hear from the one who harmed her most." He nodded toward the teacher. Every eye turned to her. She rose slowly. Hands trembling, she tried to speak, but the words stumbled out hollow and fragile. I never meant to hurt her the way I did," she whispered. "I allowed my belief in discipline to blind me to kindness. I judged her appearance instead of seeing her heart, and I realize now that I failed, not only as a teacher but as a human being." Her eyes filled with tears. "Lindiwe, I am so deeply sorry. You deserve dignity. I gave you shame instead." The apology, unpolished, raw, imperfect, hung in the air. Lindiwe's heart twisted. She didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to forgive. Part of her wanted to walk away forever. Her father placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You don't owe her forgiveness," he murmured. "Only honesty." She turned to the teacher. "What you did hurt me," she said softly. "More than you know. I felt small every day. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt ashamed of things I couldn't change." Ms. Dlamini nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But," Lindiwe continued, "I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did. Not because of poverty. Not because of appearance. Not for any reason." The teacher bowed her head, crying openly now. The board members looked stunned. Cabello stepped forward. "This school will implement the following." He listed them with firm clarity. Mandatory compassion and empathy training for all staff. Anti-bullying policies enforced with real consequences. A dignity fund for students in need of uniforms or supplies. Monthly audits of teaching practices. Scholarships expanded, not reduced. A student-led kindness council with my daughter as one of its founders, if she wishes. Lindiwe's eyes widened in surprise. "And finally," he added sharply, "any form of classism, cruelty, or humiliation will be treated as misconduct worthy of dismissal, regardless of seniority." The room absorbed his words like gospel. The board nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. Agreed," he finished. "If these reforms are upheld, my funding remains. If not, it disappears immediately." The principal almost collapsed with relief. "We will honor every condition." Cabello nodded once. Then he looked at his daughter. "Do you want to remain at this school? The choice is yours." She hesitated. She thought of the pain, but also the change she could inspire. Finally, she lifted her chin. "I want to stay," she said firmly, "but not as the girl who was mocked, as the girl who makes sure no one else is." Her father smiled a deep, proud smile. "Then we stay." The school board applauded awkwardly. Students waiting outside began whispering that something big had changed, and for the first time, when Lindiwe walked through the corridors, students stepped aside, not in judgment, but in quiet respect. Naledi approached timidly, no arrogance in her posture. "Lindiwe," she whispered, unable to meet her eyes. I'm sorry." Lindiwe nodded politely, but walked past her. Forgiveness would come later if it ever came at all. Right now, she didn't need to give anything else away. For once, she needed to claim something for herself. Dignity. As she stepped outside with her father, sunlight poured onto the courtyard, warm and bright. The day felt different. The world felt different. Her father looked down at her. "I'm proud of you." She smiled a real smile. "I'm proud of me too." For the first time in a long time, she believed it. The afternoon sun hung high above Mbali Heights, casting long shadows across the courtyard as students slowly dispersed, their voices filled with bewildered excitement. Word of the morning's events had spread like wildfire. Every hallway echoed with stunned retellings. "She's the daughter of a billionaire. He came in a helicopter, can you imagine?" The teacher actually apologized in front of everyone. "The whole school is changing because of her." But as remarkable as everything sounded, for Lindiwe, the day felt surreal, like she was walking inside someone else's story. Her tears had dried, but a strange warmth lingered in her chest, something she'd never felt at school before. Hope. Her father walked beside her, his presence a steady shelter after a long, unforgiving storm. They paused near the jacaranda tree, the same tree where she had cried in silence just the day before. Purple petals fluttered around them, falling gently like tiny blessings. Cabello looked up at the branches. I remember standing under a tree like this when I was your age, he said softly. She glanced at him with curiosity. Were you also made fun of? He nodded slowly. For being poor, for wearing shoes just like yours, for not fitting into a world obsessed with appearances. Her breath caught. She had never imagined her father, the powerful man she saw today, once knew the kind of pain she endured. What did you do? She asked. His gaze drifted into memory. I worked, I studied, I dreamed, but I also learned something important. He crouched beside her, lowering himself to her height. People will judge you for what they see, but only you decide what you become. She held his gaze. Did it still hurt? Yes, he answered honestly. Pain doesn't vanish just because you rise above it. But rising teaches you something. Pain can't take away strength. She looked down at her torn shoes, the symbol of everything she had endured. Do you think I'm strong? He smiled softly. I know you are. They stood together in silence for a moment. The quiet felt different now, not heavy, but peaceful. As they walked back inside for the final meeting with the school board, students stepped aside respectfully, whispering, pointing, but no longer with mockery. Some looked ashamed, others curious, many in awe. Inside the conference room, the board members had drafted a formal document outlining the new reforms, the Dignity Initiative. They called it Policies Built Around Compassion, Equality, and Student Welfare. After reviewing it, Cabello nodded. This is a beginning, he said. But make no mistake, change must be lived, not written. The board agreed. Then the principal turned to Lindyway. We would like to invite you, he said with a gentle smile, to help launch the school's new Student Kindness Council. Her eyes widened. Me. Yes, he said, because today, without meaning to, you became a leader. She hesitated, her voice small. I'm not sure I know how to lead, but you do, her father said. You led by standing up, by speaking the truth, by surviving what others could not. Leadership is not loudness, it is courage. She felt those words seep into her bones. The board members nodded encouragingly. You'll have guidance, one of them added, and support, but your voice will set the tone. Her breath trembled. I would like that. They smiled warmly. After final signatures were made and decisions affirmed, Cabello placed a supportive arm around his daughter's shoulders and guided her out of the school building for the day. Students watched as they exited together, not the timid girl who once hid her shoes, but someone new, someone transforming before their eyes. Outside, a crowd of parents had already gathered, curious about the helicopter and the media coverage. Some approached cautiously. Is it true? One mother asked. You came because your daughter was bullied. Yes, he replied simply. Another parent shook his head in disbelief. I've never seen a school forced to change so quickly. Your daughter, she's brave. Lindyway blushed, unused to praise. She murmured a quiet thank you. Then an unexpected figure stepped forward. Naledi. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice, for once, carried no arrogance. Lindyway, she said quietly. I'm sorry. Truly, I didn't understand how much I was hurting you. Her throat tightened. I shouldn't have said those things. Lindyway studied her for a long moment. Yesterday, she might have wanted to disappear at the sight of her. But today, she felt something shift inside, a softening, not forgiveness, but possibility. You didn't know better, she said gently. But now you can do better. Naledi nodded, her eyes glossy. I will, God. Her father's proud smile warmed her side. As they walked toward the car, he leaned down. You handled that beautifully. She shrugged lightly. I just didn't want her to feel the way I did. That, he whispered, is grace. That evening, after the city calmed and the sunset painted golden streaks across the skyline, Lindyway and her father arrived at his home, a towering estate overlooking the river. She had never seen anything so beautiful. The garden glowed with soft lights, fountains whispered in the dusk, and the walls shimmered with the reflection of luxury she never imagined belonging to. Her father watched her take it all in. "This is your home now," he said quietly. "It's unbelievable," she whispered. He smiled. "You're welcome to stay with your aunt whenever you like. But here, you will have your own room, your own space, your own future." She nodded, overwhelmed but grateful. He led her upstairs to a spacious bedroom with soft linens, warm lighting, a view of the horizon, and a closet she would one day fill with new memories. Not shame, but when she looked down at her torn shoes, something inside her stopped her from tossing them away. "May I?" she asked shyly. "Keep these." Her father looked puzzled for a moment, then his expression softened. "Of course. They're part of your journey." "Yes," she whispered, clutching them gently. "A part I don't want to forget." He placed his hand on her shoulder. "You will walk far in new shoes, my daughter. But these," he tapped them lightly, "they built your strength." She smiled. Later, as she lay in bed, her eyelids heavy, she thought back to the girl she was just yesterday, afraid, invisible, humiliated. And now, she felt something unfamiliar, powerful, seen, loved. Tomorrow, she would return to school not as the mocked girl with torn shoes, but as someone who had changed an entire institution, who had stood in front of a nation and said, "I am not broken." As she drifted into sleep, her last thought was simple but profound. Maybe I was always more than they saw. Maybe I just needed the chance to see it too. And somewhere across the hall, her father whispered a promise to himself. "I will never let her walk alone again." Life often teaches its harshest lessons through the quiet struggles no one sees. Lindy Way's torn shoes symbolized more than poverty. They symbolized resilience, courage, and the invisible battles children face every day. In a world that judges quickly and harshly, we must remember that true worth isn't measured by appearance, wealth, or status. It is measured by kindness, empathy, and the strength to rise after being broken. When we choose compassion over judgment, we change not only one life, but entire communities. And when a single voice, no matter how small, speaks truth, it can spark a transformation greater than anyone expects. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful African folktale dramas full of emotion, lessons, and unforgettable twists.